I was lying on the upper berth, my back pressed against the cold metal wall of the carriage, praying that the lock on the compartment door would hold. Someone was standing outside in the corridor. I couldn't see him, but I could hear his heavy, wet breathing, drowning out the clatter of the wheels. The door handle began to sink down, slowly, millimeter by millimeter. "I told you not to go out," the voice said calmly, almost casually, which made it even more terrifying. "I asked you to stay quiet while we were on the bridge." The lock clicked. The door opened a few centimeters, and fingers slid into the gap. Pale, with dirt under the nails, they didn't try to wrench the door open. They simply felt along the frame, as if testing the quality of the wood. This isn't a horror movie. This happened to me 3 years ago on a night train that, as I later discovered, wasn't even listed in the official schedule. And if you ever find yourself in an empty carriage with no conductor, and then a man without a uniform comes to you, for God's sake, do everything he tells you. You're listening to the Horror Story channel. And this is my story. It all began with a banal logistical mistake. I got stuck on a business trip in a small provincial town, missed my Sapsan, and ended up stranded at the station with a dead phone and a splitting headache. The next normal train wasn't until morning, but I had no desire to spend the night at a station that smelled of chlorine and greasy meat pastries. At the ticket window, behind thick, cloudy glass, sat a woman with an impossibly exhausted face. When I asked if there was any way to leave that night, she tapped at the keyboard for a long time, frowned, and then handed me a strange ticket. An additional train. Through service. 2-minute stop. Car 13, she muttered, sliding the slip of paper toward me. It's at the tail. Run. It's already pulling in. I ran. The platform was empty, the lamps lit every other one, casting long, dancing shadows. The train rolled into the station almost silently, as if sneaking in. It was an old set, peeling green paint, dark windows, the smell of coal smoke. I found the 13th car. The door was open, the step lowered, but there was no conductor in sight. Normally they stand there with flags or lanterns, checking passports, grumbling. Here, no one. Silence. Darkness in the vestibule. I jumped inside a second before the train lurched forward. Inside, the car looked like it had been dragged straight out of a 1990s museum. Carpet runners worn threadbare, dim yellow light flickering in time with the wheels, and that specific smell, a mix of old mattress, cheap tea, and dust. I walked down the corridor. Empty. The compartment doors were open, and there was no one inside. Only in the 6th compartment was there light. A man about 50 sat there in a stretched-out undershirt, peeling a hard-boiled egg. He looked at me with such surprise it was as if he'd seen a ghost. "Oh, a fellow traveler," he snorted. "I thought I'd be riding alone. Strange run, huh? No bedding, no tea. Haven't seen a conductor at all." "Me neither," I said, tossing my bag into the neighboring 7th compartment. "Maybe he's asleep somewhere." I settled onto the lower berth. The car was old but warm. The clatter of the wheels was soothing. I took out a book, trying to distract myself, but the unease wouldn't go away. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and sense you've interrupted a conversation, even though no one's there? That's how this carriage felt. An hour passed quietly. The train picked up speed, the landscape outside turned into a black smear with rare village lights. I went to the restroom, it was locked. I walked to the front of the car, to the conductor's compartment. The door was locked, the curtain drawn. I knocked. Silence. "Hey!" I called. "Anyone alive in there? Open the toilet." Nothing. I pressed my ear to the door. Inside it was quiet, but somehow tense. As if someone was standing right behind the door, listening to me too. I went back. My neighbor, who'd introduced himself as Victor, was already snoring. I decided to forget about the toilet and wait until morning, then lay down to sleep, using my jacket as a blanket. The mattress looked too suspicious. I woke up cold. The window, which I distinctly remembered closing tightly, was ajar, and icy night air blasted straight into my face. The train was moving fast, swaying so much that a bottle of water fell from the table. I checked my watch. 2:00 a.m. Exactly. That's when I heard footsteps. They came from the far end of the corridor. Heavy, measured steps. Soul striking carpet. But there was something wrong about them. Too loud for soft shoes. Too hard. The steps drew closer. Stopped at Victor's compartment. I held my breath. I heard his door creak. "Tickets, please," a man's voice said, low, flat, without intonation. I heard Victor's sleepy grumble, the rustle of paper. "Why aren't you in uniform?" Victor asked hoarsely. "And where's the bedding?" "Safety protocol," the voice replied, ignoring the question. "In 20 minutes we'll be crossing the Black Bridge. Close the windows. Lower the curtains. Do not leave the corridor. The vestibule is strictly forbidden." "What? What bridge?" Victor was clearly waking up. "Do not go into the vestibule," the voice repeated sharply. "Good night." Victor's door closed. The footsteps moved toward me. I sat up on the berth, my heart pounding somewhere in my throat. My compartment door slid open. A man stood in the doorway. He looked completely ordinary. Gray sweater, dark work pants. His face. I can't remember his face. It was somehow erased, unmemorable. Nose, eyes, mouth, everything seemed to be there, but when you tried to assemble the image, it slipped away. He had no tablet, no ticket scanner. Just an old, battered notebook. "Your ticket," he said. I handed him the printout with a trembling hand. He didn't even look at it. Just touched the paper with his finger and nodded. "Are you the conductor?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why is the toilet locked?" He raised his eyes. They were dark, almost without whites, though that may have been the dim light. "We're approaching the bridge," he said. "Sanitary zone." "What bridge?" "We should be in open step." He stepped into the compartment. The air around him smelled not of sweat or tobacco, but of damp earth and stagnant water. "Listen carefully," he lowered his voice. "There's a long stretch coming up. The train will slow down. The lights may go out. Under no circumstances leave the compartment. And most importantly, do not go near the vestibule. No matter what you hear. What could I hear? What wants to come in, he replied simply, turned, and left, slamming my door shut. I sat there in the darkness, listening as his footsteps moved toward the out-of-service vestibule. A lock clicked at the end of the corridor. Then silence. For 5 minutes I didn't move. My rational mind said, this is nonsense. A drunk employee. A prank. You're overtired. But instinct, that ancient instinct that makes us fear the dark, was screaming, danger. The train began to slow. The rhythm of the wheels changed. Instead of the familiar tuduk, tuduk, there was a hollow metallic hum. We really were entering a bridge. The ceiling light flickered and went out. The carriage plunged into darkness, lit only by faint moonlight seeping through gaps in the curtains. In the neighboring compartment, Victor stirred. I heard him step into the corridor. "Hey, boss," he shouted. "Why'd you kill the lights? I need the toilet." I wanted to yell at him to go back, but my tongue felt glued to the roof of my mouth. "Hey, sweater guy." Victor's voice moved toward the vestibule. "Where are you? Open the door." The train crawled. Hollow echoes rose from the water far below. I cautiously peeked into the corridor. Victor stood at the end of the car, by the vestibule door. He yanked the handle. "Locked or what?" He banged on the door. "Open up. I wanna smoke." Then I heard it. A sound from the other side of the vestibule door. Outside. It was like something wet and heavy slamming into the exterior of the train. Splat. Then a scrape. Like claws on metal. "Who's there?" Victor froze. The scraping moved. Now it wasn't outside the train, it was inside the vestibule. Something was in that narrow space between the cars. Victor must have thought it was the conductor. "Oh, hiding there, huh?" He leaned on the handle again. "Victor, don't." I finally forced the words out, leaning from my compartment. "He told us not to open it." Victor turned toward me, grinning in the dark. "Screw him. I paid for a ticket. I've got the right to piss and smoke." He pressed harder. The lock gave. The vestibule door began to open with a creak. A blast of cold and the stench of swamp rot poured out, so strong I nearly vomited onto the carpet. The darkness inside the vestibule was thicker than night. It felt tangible. Victor froze in the doorway. His grin slid away. He began to back up slowly. "Hey," he whispered. "Who are you?" The darkness didn't answer. But I saw something long and pale, like an elongated arm with too many joints, lash out at him. Victor screamed. Not a scream of pain, but of absolute, animal terror. The force of the yank was so violent it literally sucked him into the vestibule. His feet lifted off the floor, his slippers flew off. He tried to grab the doorframe, his nails gouged the paint, but the strength on the other side was relentless. The vestibule door slammed shut with a deafening crash. I stood in the corridor, paralyzed. From behind the door came thuds, wet, dull sounds, and Victor's screams, which quickly turned into gurgling. Then silence. Only the hollow rumble of wheels on the bridge. I bolted back into my compartment. Slammed the door. Locked it. Turned the latch. Propped the handle with my suitcase. Climbed onto the upper berth and pressed myself into the corner. That was when I heard the footsteps again. The same rhythm. Heavy, wet steps. Coming from the vestibule. Slowly. Stopping at each compartment. They stopped at the 6th, Victor's. The door opened, stood open for a moment, then closed. The steps moved toward me. They stopped right behind the thin wall. I stopped breathing. I could hear it breathing on the other side. This wasn't human breathing. It sounded like an accordion's bellows filled with water, compressing and expanding. The door handle began to lower. "I told you not to go out," the conductor's voice said again. But now there was no calm in it. There was hungry mockery. "I asked you to sit quietly while we were on the bridge." I stared at the sinking handle. The suitcase bracing the door shifted slightly. "Ticket checked," the voice whispered straight into the keyhole. "Passenger present." The door jolted from a powerful blow. The suitcase flew aside. The gap widened. I saw the fingers, gray, wet. "Go away!" I screamed, out of my mind with fear. "I have a ticket. You checked it." The fingers froze. The train jerked. The hollow bridge sound stopped. The wheels resumed their familiar rhythm, tuduk, tuduk. We were off the bridge, back on solid ground. The fingers slowly withdrew into the corridor. The door slammed shut on its own. "Have a pleasant journey," came from the corridor, and the footsteps retreated until they faded completely. I stayed like that until dawn. Knife in hand, taken from my bag, not closing my eyes. When gray morning sky appeared in the window and we approached a large station, I finally dared to go out. The corridor was empty. The vestibule door was closed. Victor's compartment stood wide open. Inside, nothing. His belongings were gone. The bed was untouched, as if no one had slept there. Only one slipper lay on the floor by the threshold. The train stopped. I jumped onto the platform first, nearly knocking over a heavy-set woman in Russian Railways uniform standing by the car with a folder. "Young man, where did you come from?" she asked, startled. "From 13, I gasped. There was. Someone disappeared. And the conductor. Strange." She frowned and looked at the car. "What 13? She stared at me like I was insane. "This car is a transfer unit. It's going for repairs. Written off a week ago. Doors locked, no power. We're hauling it empty. How did you even get in there?" I turned around. The windows were coated in a thick layer of dust and grime. The door I just exited was welded shut, a rusty lock hanging from it. But I had just come through it. But I was riding. I began, then stopped. On my jacket, on my shoulder, there was a mark. A dirty, greasy handprint. Too long to be human. I didn't explain anything. I just left. Later, I googled that stretch of track. Locals call it the Black Bridge. They say in the 90s gangs often stopped trains there, robbed them, threw bodies into the river. There's also a story about a conductor who was killed on that stretch, thrown off a moving train because he tried to protect passengers. Or maybe he was working with the bandits. The stories differ. But I know one thing. That night, my ticket didn't list a seat. And when that man, or that thing, checked it, he wasn't checking payment. He was checking whether I still belonged to this world, or was already one of theirs. Victor broke the rules. He opened the door. I still travel by train. It's my job. But now I only buy tickets in fully occupied compartments. And if, at exactly 2 in the morning, I hear footsteps in the corridor, I pull the blanket over my head and pretend I'm not there. Because sometimes I think I can still hear that wet, heavy breathing behind the thin compartment wall. And a voice whispering, "Tickets, please." I was standing in the vestibule of the 4th car, my forehead pressed against the cold, fogged glass of the end door. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't light a cigarette. The lighter threw sparks, but there was no flame. Or maybe I just couldn't catch the wheel properly. Outside, in the inky darkness, the wheels thundered over the rails. But I wasn't watching the tracks rushing away. I was staring at what was attached behind us. Through the filthy glass, in the dull red glow of a tail lantern, I could see the coupling. Massive steel hooks were stretched tight, like strings pulled to the limit. They were dragging another car. A car that wasn't listed in the manifest. A car whose windows glowed with a sickly, yellowish light. And the most terrifying thing wasn't that it was there. It was what I saw through the glass of its vestibule door. A man was standing there. He was wearing an old-style conductor's uniform. He wasn't holding on to the handrails, despite the violent shaking. He was just standing there, staring straight at me. Then he raised his hand and slowly, very slowly, knocked on the glass from his side. The sound of that knock drowned out even the roar of the wheels. This really happened 3 years ago, on a stretch of track railway workers try to pass at maximum speed. I still can't sleep without the light on. And if you ever take a night train and hear an extra pair of wheels keeping time, don't go to the tail of the train. It all started because I needed money. Plain, boring, but it was debt that made me agree to cover a shift. My coworker, Vitya, had come down with some kind of nasty illness, flu or food poisoning, and begged me to take his run. The route was mediocre at best, a night train, officially mail and baggage, with passenger service. Few stops, old rolling stock, long dead stretches through forests and swamps. The train consisted of only 4 cars. 2 open sleepers, 1 compartment car, mine, and a baggage car at the front. There weren't many passengers. Midweek, November, miserable weather. Sleet lashed the windows even at the platform, smearing the station lights into blurry stains. I took over the shift, checked the bedding, counted the glasses in their metal holders. Routine. The train chief, a heavy-set man named Semyonov, walked through the cars before departure. "For cars," he muttered, marking something on his tablet. "You've got the tail, Lyoka. Watch the doors. No signal on the Krasnoyar stretch for about 2 hours. Don't fall asleep." I nodded. Don't fall asleep. Easy to say. When the train pulled out and left the city behind, the monotonous clatter of the wheels began to work like hypnosis. The car was half empty. There were maybe 10 people in my compartment car, and almost all of them fell asleep right away. The corridor was lit by a night lamp, a dim strip of light that made the shadows long and twitchy. The first 3 hours passed quietly. I sat in my service compartment, drank lukewarm tea, and scrolled through the news while I still had a signal. Then the network vanished. My phone showed no service. We had entered that very stretch. On both sides was a wall of forest. The trees pressed so close to the tracks that branches sometimes slapped against the car, like bony fingers feeling for a way in. Around 2 in the morning, I decided to make a round. It was mandatory by instruction: check the boiler, walk the corridor, make sure everything was calm. I stepped out of my compartment. The car was quiet, just snoring behind half-open doors and the clink of a spoon in someone's glass. I walked to the end of the corridor, toward the tail. The fourth car was the last one. Beyond it, nothing but emptiness and rails. The end door in the vestibule was supposed to be locked with a special triangular key. I always check it twice. Rookie paranoia. I pulled the handle. Locked. I looked through the door window. Blackness. Only the rails running backward, faintly glinting in the marker lights. Everything was normal. I went back, sat down, and tried to solve a crossword. 20 minutes later, I felt it. A change in rhythm. Anyone who works on the railway knows the voice of their train. Tuduk, tuduk. Tuduk, tuduk. That's the rhythm of 4 cars. But now the sound had changed. It had grown heavier. As if there was an extra behind it. Tuduk, tuduk. Tudukh. A delay. An echo. The car jerked. Not hard, but enough, like someone had grabbed us by the tail and yanked us back. Tea spilled from my glass onto the table. What the hell? I whispered. Brakes? A wheelset problem? I picked up the internal phone to call the engineer. Semyonov, this is the 4th. I've got some strange vibration. And jerks. The line crackled. Through the white noise, the engineer's voice broke through, distorted and distant, even though he was barely 300 meters away. All normal. Running on schedule. You're imagining it. Go get some sleep. The connection died. I hung up. I wasn't imagining it. The hum was growing. The floor vibrated beneath my feet, but not the usual way. This was the tremor of metal under strain. I stepped back into the corridor. The air had changed. It was cold. Not just cool, an icy cold that cut to the bone despite the heating. And there was a smell. Along with the familiar mix of coal smoke and dusty mattresses, there was something else. The smell of damp earth. And burnt rubber. A sharp, chemical stench that made my throat seize. I headed toward the tail. Each step was harder than the last, my legs turning to cotton. My survival instinct was screaming, "Go back to your compartment, lock yourself in, hide under a blanket." But I was a conductor. I was responsible for the car. I reached the vestibule. The door from the corridor into the vestibule was ajar. I clearly remembered closing it tight so there wouldn't be a draft. It swayed with the motion of the train, hinges creaking. E-e-e-e, E-e-e-e, I stepped into the vestibule. It was dark. The ceiling bulb flickered, about to burn out. I looked at the end door. The one that led outside, into nothing. The lock was open. The triangular key was sticking out of the keyhole. My breath caught. My key was in my pocket. Who else had a key? The train chief? He was asleep in the first car. I moved closer. The cold was coming from there, from the gaps around the door. I grabbed the handle and pulled, intending to slam it shut and lock it tight. The door didn't budge. It wasn't just open, it wasn't frozen, no. I pushed. The door swung outward, into the roaring night. And I saw it. We weren't alone. Behind my car, where there should have been only sleepers and rails, another car was moving. It was old. Much older than our train. The green paint on its sides was flaking, exposing rusted metal. The windows were dark, covered with some cloudy film, but inside something glowed. Not electricity. The light flickered, like candles or kerosene lamps. The gangway, the accordion connection, was down. It linked my car to this ghost. The clang of metal was deafening. The coupling groaned, as if it could tear apart at any second. I stood on the edge, gripping the handrail, wind whipping snow and soot into my face. Where had it come from? Dispatch hadn't said anything about attaching a car. We hadn't stopped for even a minute. It was physically impossible to couple a car on the move at 80 kilometers an hour. I should have gone back. Locked the door. Pulled the emergency brake. But I couldn't move. I was staring at the door of that car. It was slightly open. From inside came unbearable heat, somehow mixed with the icy wind. Then I heard a sound. Not the wheels. Music. Quiet, distorted, like from a broken gramophone. An old waltz. It cut through the roar of the train, lodging itself in my ears. I took a step forward. I don't know why. As if the part of me responsible for logic had shut down. I stepped across the clanging buffers. My foot landed on the metal platform of the car. It was slick and sticky. I grabbed the handle of the fifth car's door. It was hot. I went inside. The vestibule was cluttered with junk, sacks, bundles, boxes. Everything was coated in a thick layer of black soot. The smell of burning here was unbearable. I started coughing, covering my mouth with my sleeve. Then I opened the door into the corridor. Inside, the light was dim and yellow. The carpet runner was scorched in dozens of places. The walls were warped. As if the car had been squeezed by a giant vice and then forced back into shape. The geometry was wrong, compartment doors crooked, the ceiling sagging too low. And there were people. I walked down the corridor, my steps swallowed by a viscous silence that ruled here in defiance of physics. The noise of the train was gone. Only the waltz remained. The compartment doors were open. In the first one sat a woman. She was staring out the window. She wore an old-fashioned coat with a fur collar. But her posture, it was unnatural. Her shoulder twisted at a wrong angle. Her head bowed too low against her chest. "Excuse me," I whispered. "Your ticket." "What ticket?" What was I saying? She didn't move. I saw her reflection in the dark glass. She had no face. Instead, there was a single, bloody mass, with shards of glasses fused into it. I reeled back against the opposite wall, slammed my spine into the handrail. My heart was pounding up in my throat. I looked into the next compartment. A family sat there. A man, a woman, and a child. They sat motionless, holding hands. Their skin was gray, like ash. Their clothes were charred. They were smoldering. Thin smoke rose from them, but there was no open flame. All their eyes were open. White, boiled eyes, staring at a single point. I knew where I was. I didn't know the number of this car, but I knew the story. 5 years ago, there had been a disaster on this stretch. A freight train derailed and plowed into the tail of a passenger train. The last car was crushed like an accordion. A fire broke out. No one survived. Officially, the car had been written off and scrapped. But here it was. Here. Moving with us. Panic washed over me in an icy wave. I had to run. I turned toward the vestibule I'd come through. And saw him. At the end of the corridor, blocking the exit, stood the conductor. The same one I would later see through the glass. His uniform was torn to shreds. A badge hung on his chest, but the plastic had melted and dripped in black drops onto the jacket. Half his head was gone. The left side of his skull was crushed inward. But he stood straight. In his hands, he held a glass of tea in a silver holder. Steam rose from it, forming strange patterns. He took a step toward me. "Will you be turning in your linens?" he rasped. The voice didn't come from his throat. It sounded directly inside my head, like metal scraping glass. final stop soon. Everyone prepare. The waltz grew louder. It wasn't just a waltz anymore. It was screaming. The music was made of human cries, looped into the rhythm of 1, 2, 3. The people in the compartments began to move. Slowly, with the crunch of breaking bones, they turned their heads toward me. The charred child in the neighboring compartment opened its mouth. A cloud of black smoke poured out. I screamed. It was an animal scream of terror. I bolted, not toward the vestibule where the conductor stood, but toward the other end of the car, hoping there was another exit. I ran along the carpet, which grew softer under my feet, turning into a swamp of ash. Dead hands reached out from the compartments. Cold. Hard as stone. One grabbed the hem of my jacket. I tore free, the fabric ripped. I reached the end of the corridor. A dead end. The door was welded shut. The metal had fused into a single monolith. I turned around. The conductor was coming toward me. He wasn't running. He was floating above the floor. With each step, the light in the car grew redder, brighter. Fiery veins ran along the walls. The car was remembering the fire. The heat became unbearable. The hair on my arms began to curl. "Your route isn't finished," the conductor rasped. "Seat 13 is free." I grabbed a fire extinguisher hanging on the wall. Old, rusty, heavy. I swung and smashed it into the side window. The glass cracked, but didn't shatter. It was viscous, like a spider's web. The conductor was 2 meters away now. I could see the pulsing brain through the break in his skull. At that moment, the train jolted. We were entering a curve. That very sharp curve before the bridge over the Black River. The impact threw me to the floor. The extinguisher flew from my hands and rolled to the dead man's feet. He stumbled. That gave me 1 second. I jumped up and rushed him, slamming my shoulder into him. I slipped past, catching the stench of burnt flesh. I ran for the vestibule. The exit was there. The lights flickered, turning the corridor into a strobe of nightmare. Passenger figures rose from their seats, filling the passage. I forced my way through them, shoving aside those rigid, unmoving bodies. They were like mannequins stuffed with concrete. I spilled into the vestibule. The door to my living car was right in front of me. But the bridge between the cars, it was coming apart. The coupling groaned. The hooks slowly straightened. The gap between the cars widened. Centimeter by centimeter. Below, in the chasm, the sleepers flashed by, merging into a gray ribbon of death. I jumped. In midair, I felt something icy brush my ankle. I crashed chest first onto the floor of my car's vestibule. The impact knocked the air from my lungs. I crawled forward, digging my nails into the linoleum, pulling my legs after me. I turned around. The conductor stood at the edge of that car. He didn't try to jump after me. He just watched. The coupling snapped with the sound of a cannon shot. A steel cable lashed through the air, barely missing me. The fifth car began to fall back. Slowly, reluctantly. The light in its windows flared blindingly bright for an instant. In that flash, I saw them all. Dozens of faces pressed to the glass. They were screaming, but there was no sound. The car slipped into darkness. But it didn't stay on the rails. I saw its wheels leave the track. It tilted and, silently, like in a silent film, plunged down the embankment, dissolving into fog and trees. Gone. As if erased. I lay on the vestibule floor, gasping for air. My heart hammered so hard it felt like my ribs would crack. It was quiet. Only the familiar, beloved rhythm of the wheels. Tuduk, tuduk. 4 cars. 4 again. The door into the car opened. A sleepy passenger in sweatpants stood there. "Hey, boss," he yawned. "Can you open the toilet?" It was locked. He looked at me. I was lying on the filthy floor, covered in soot, my jacket torn, my face streaked with tears and snot. "What's wrong with you? You fall or something?" We uncoupled. I croaked. We uncoupled. In the morning, at the terminal station, police and medics were waiting for me. The train chief had called them when he saw my condition. I told them everything. About the extra car. About the fire. About the conductor. They exchanged glances. The doctor injected something into me. The policeman wrote down, "acute psychosis due to exhaustion." But later, as they were leading me to the ambulance, an old track walker approached me. He'd overheard my story. He caught my eye and quietly, so the cops wouldn't hear, said, "You were on the 304th, weren't you? Through Krasny Yar?" I nodded. "Light a candle, son," he whispered. "Today's the anniversary. 5 years exactly. That fifth car burned down there. Electrical short after the impact. The doors jammed. No one got out. I don't work on the railway anymore. I quit the next day. Now I'm a courier. Day shifts only. On foot or by bicycle. No transport, you can't leave whenever you want. But sometimes, at night, when my apartment grows too quiet, I smell it. A faint scent of burning. And a distant, rhythmic knock. Tuduk, tuduk. And then an extra. Tudukh. And I know that somewhere out there, in the darkness, the fifth car is still moving. And inside it, seat 13 is still free. And it's waiting for me. I still see that moment whenever I close my eyes. The fog was so thick it felt solid, like compressed cotton. It billowed beyond the open vestibule door, hiding everything more than a meter away from the carriage. I stood there, my fingers white as they clenched the handrail, watching as that man, or whatever was pretending to be a man, stepped down the stairs. He didn't look back. He simply walked into that white void, into a place that, according to every map, should have been swamp and forest. And when his silhouette dissolved, I heard the dispatcher's voice. A voice filled with animal terror, screaming that we were standing on a track that didn't exist. This isn't an urban legend or some internet story. It happened to me 3 years ago, on a stretch of railway that railroad workers try to rush through at maximum speed. My name is Andre. I'm a former long-distance train conductor. And that's why I never board trains at night anymore. You're listening to the Horror Story Channel. Make yourself comfortable. It's better to turn the lights off. It all started with a decision I regret every single day. It was an unscheduled run. My replacement, Vitya, was rushed to the hospital with appendicitis 2 hours before departure, and the head conductor, a heavy-set man with a perpetually red face named Semenov, practically begged me to take the shift. "Double pay, Andreyuka," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Quiet route, few passengers. You'll get some sleep." I needed the money. I was saving up for a used foreign car, and that, double pay, became the hook I swallowed. If I'd known the true price of that money, I would have burned my conductor's certificate right there on the platform. The train was old. One of those reserved seat dinosaurs, with wooden window frames, drafts whistling through every crack so the curtains trembled, and the smell of coal dust and stale linens permanently embedded in the upholstery. My carriage was number 7. The very end of the train. Boarding went normally. Regular people, shift workers with massive bags, a few students, grandmothers with grandchildren. The usual bustle, the clinking of tea glasses in holders, arguments over luggage space. I checked tickets, handed out bedding, smiled my professional smile. Everything ran on rails, automatic after 5 years on the job. But there was one passenger. He boarded last, literally a minute before departure. A tall, thin man in a long gray overcoat that looked strangely old-fashioned, yet expensive. He had no luggage. No bag, no suitcase, not even a briefcase. Just his hands in his pockets. He handed me a printed e-ticket. Seat 37. A side berth right next to the toilet, at the end of the carriage. The most hated seat of all, constant door slamming, the smell of tobacco from the vestibule, people passing by non-stop. Yet he chose it. "Your seat is 37, I said, handing the ticket back. "Will you need bedding?" "No." His voice was quiet, hollow, as if he were speaking from inside an empty barrel. "I won't be long." I shrugged. Not long, so not long. Even though his ticket was to the final destination, a journey of nearly 24 hours. Strange, but not illegal. People have their quirks. The train pulled out. City lights drifted backward, giving way to dark industrial zones, then to the solid black wall of forest. The carriage came alive. The smell of instant noodles, fried chicken, someone at the front already pouring cognac into tea glasses. I made my rounds, checked the boiler, water heating fine. I passed seat 37. The passenger was sitting by the window, staring into the darkness. He hadn't taken off his coat. Hadn't pulled out a phone. He just sat there, unnaturally straight, staring at the glass that reflected only the interior of the carriage. That was when I felt the first prick of unease. You know that feeling when you look at someone and realize something's wrong, not with how they look, but with how they occupy space. He was too still. Even when the carriage jolted over a switch, his body didn't move, as if he were bolted to the berth. I went back to my conductor's compartment, brewed strong tea, and tried to push the strange man out of my mind. A long night lay ahead. By 2 a.m., the carriage had fallen silent. The lights switched to night mode, dim bulbs under the ceiling casting long, trembling shadows. Snoring, soft breathing, the occasional rustle of sheets. The sounds of a sleeping reserved seat car usually calmed me, created an illusion of safety. But not tonight. I sat in the service compartment, unable to focus on my book. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing outside the door, in the half-dark corridor. I checked several times, no one. Just passengers' feet sticking out from under blankets. But the moment I closed the door, the sensation of being watched returned. It drilled into the back of my skull, sent cold fingers crawling under my shirt. At 2:45, I decided to make another round. I needed to check the toilets, make sure no one was smoking in the vestibule. I put on my uniform jacket and stepped into the corridor. The carriage slept. The steady rhythm of the wheels, clack-clack, clack-clack, clack-clack. Normally hypnotic, but now it felt too loud, as if the train were pounding not on rails, but on my nerves. I reached the end of the carriage. Seat 37. The man wasn't asleep. He sat in the exact same position as 5 hours earlier. Coat buttoned all the way up. Hands on his knees. Still staring into the black window. "Is everything all right?" I whispered, trying not to wake the others. He slowly turned his head. In the dim light, his face looked gray, as if molded from wet clay. His eyes were dark, dull. "We're approaching," he said. Not a question, a statement. "The station?" I frowned. "The next stop isn't until 5 a.m. Kamienka. That's 2 hours away." "No." His lips barely moved. "We're approaching the boundary." A chill ran down my spine. I decided he was drunk or unwell. "Listen, you should lie down and sleep. I can bring you a blanket if you need one." "Sleep is for those who have time," he replied, turning back to the window. I stood there for a second, unsure what to do, then waved it off and went to check the vestibule. It was cold in the vestibule, smelling of metal. I checked the door, it was locked with the triangular key, as it should be. Through the cloudy glass of the intercar passage, I could see darkness and flashing sleepers. Then the sound changed. Normally, a train's noise is even. But suddenly the tone of the wheels dropped. Became duller. As if we'd entered a tunnel, or as if there were no solid embankment beneath us anymore. The speed began to drop. I didn't feel a braking jolt, but inertia nudged my body forward. We were slowing down. I checked my watch. 2:58 a.m. Dead night. Taiga stretching for hundreds of kilometers. There shouldn't have been any stations here, not even technical sidings. I knew this route by heart. I went back into the carriage. The train was slowing more and more. Clack. Clack. CL. CK. The passengers slept. No one stirred at the change in rhythm, which was strange in itself. Usually, when a train breaks between stations, people toss, wake up, ask what's going on. But now there was a coffin-like silence, broken only by the creak of brake pads. I ran to my compartment and grabbed the internal phone to the engineer. Seventh carriage calling the engineer. Why are we braking? What's happening? Only static answered. Angry, crackling white noise. Engineer. Respond to the seventh. Silence. And through that static, somewhere far away, I heard a voice. It wasn't speaking, it was chanting. Or praying. Impossible to tell, but the intonation was terrifying. Monotonous. The train came to a complete stop. This wasn't a gentle platform stop. It felt as if the train had entered a thick substance that swallowed its momentum. Silence crashed down instantly. The wheels stopped. The ventilation died. Even the passengers' snoring seemed to fade. I looked out the window of my compartment. Fog. Not a light morning mist, but a dense, milky white wall. It pressed against the glass like a living thing, trying to peer inside. No lights. Not a single glow. Then I heard footsteps in the corridor. Clear, measured footsteps. Someone was walking from the end of the carriage toward the exit. I leaned out. It was him. The passenger from seat 37. He walked down the aisle without holding the handrails, though the floor was slightly tilted. He passed me without looking and headed into the service vestibule, the one with the exterior door. Hey! I called, following him. Stop. Exiting is forbidden. We're between stations, this is a technical stop. He didn't stop. He opened the vestibule door as if it weighed nothing. I rushed after him. The vestibule was freezing. My breath fogged. The man stood by the side door of the carriage, the one locked with the special triangular key only conductors have. He raised his hand, touched the handle. And the door gave way. It opened with a nasty, rusty screech, letting thick fog spill inside. What are you doing? I screamed, grabbing his shoulder. The coat under my hand was cold and damp, as if he'd been standing in the rain for hours. He slowly turned around. Now I saw his face in the weak vestibule light. It had changed. The features sharpened, skin stretched tight over the cheekbones, and his eyes. There were no whites in his eyes. Only black, bottomless void. I recoiled, stumbling back. Fear, sticky, primal, clamped my throat shut. I can't go any farther, he said. The voice didn't sound in the air, it sounded inside my head. This is my station. What station? I croaked, my back pressed to the wall. There's forest here. Swamp. He smiled. But it wasn't a human smile. It was a joyless snarl. Look down, Andre. I didn't want to look, but my gaze slid to the open doorway on its own. Below, in breaks in the fog, I saw a platform. Not a modern concrete one. Old, rotten boards laid directly on the ground. And a sign. A rusted sheet of metal on a leaning post. The paint was peeling, but I could make out the letters, written in an old orthography. Sorrow. I blinked, and the letters blurred. My time is up, the man said. Yours isn't. Don't follow me. No matter what you hear, don't follow. He turned and stepped into the void. I saw his foot touch the rotten boards. There was no sound. The fog swallowed him instantly. 2 steps, and he dissolved like smoke. I stood there, paralyzed with terror. A smell drifted through the open door, not forest air. It smelled of damp earth, wilted flowers, and formalin. Then a sound came from the fog. A child crying. Thin, plaintive. Mom? Mom, where are you? Then another voice, a woman's. Help. Someone, please. The voices sounded very close, right at the foot of the carriage. Conductor, someone screamed from the mist. Let us out. We're here. My hand twitched toward the handrail. Instinct screamed, there are people there, they need help. I took a step toward the open door. The fog twisted in spirals, and I thought I saw pale faces reaching up toward me. Dozens of hands. Don't follow me. The passenger's words crashed back into my mind like ice water. I froze. The hands in the fog became clearer. Gray. Semi-transparent. And they weren't asking for help. They wanted to grab. With a scream, I lunged for the door, seized the handle, and yanked with all my strength. Metal clanged, the lock snapped shut. With shaking hands, I pulled out the triangular key and locked it twice. The voices outside instantly turned into a furious howl. Something slammed into the door from outside. A dull, heavy blow that shook the entire carriage. Then another. And another. As if a massive fist were pounding the metal. I staggered back into the carriage, shut the vestibule door, and slid down it onto the floor. My heart hammered so hard my ribs ached. Then the radio on my belt crackled to life. Through the static burst Semenov's voice. But he wasn't giving orders. He was screaming. Damn it! 7th carriage. Andrei, respond. I'm here. I grabbed the radio, fingers numb. Semenov, what's happening? Who stopped us? There's someone outside. Andrei. Semenov's voice shrieked. Don't open anything. We didn't break. Do you hear me? We're at full speed. I froze. What? I whispered. We're standing. I just locked the door. There's a platform here. Station, Sorrow. Silence on the radio. A long, heavy pause. Then the engineer's voice, quiet and trembling. Andriuka. Look out the window. I forced myself to stand. My legs felt like rubber. I went to the corridor window and pressed my forehead to the cold glass. The fog was thinning. Slowly. Reluctantly. And I saw it. We weren't standing still. The train was racing forward. Trees outside blurred into a solid streak. The speed was no less than 80. But a second ago, I'd been standing in an open vestibule. A second ago, I'd seen rotten boards and heard blows on the door. I looked at my hands. There was rust on my palms. And traces of some gray slime. The dispatcher's losing his mind, the engineer's voice said over the radio, as if he didn't believe it himself. Ahead, at kilometer 402, there's a ground collapse. The embankment sank into the swamp. Sensors triggered a minute ago. If we hadn't slowed down, if we hadn't stopped, we'd all be down there by now. Cold sweat broke over me. But you said we didn't break, I whispered. According to the instruments, we didn't, the engineer replied. Everything was steady. But in reality, we're 10 kilometers behind where we should be. As if someone held us back, or moved us backward in time. I slowly walked to seat 37. The berth was empty. The bedding lay untouched, perfectly smooth, as if no one had ever sat there. But on the table, right in the center, lay an object. I stepped closer. It was an antique pocket watch on a chain. The lid was open, the glass cracked. The hands were frozen. The time read 3:13. The exact minute I locked the vestibule door. I spent the rest of the night in the service compartment, every light turned on, gripping a crowbar. I didn't sleep a minute. Every moment, I thought I heard footsteps in the corridor or the soft scrape of claws against the outer shell of the carriage. In the morning, when we reached the final station, I went straight to the head conductor, Semenov, the engineer, and I drank a bottle of vodka in silence, without clinking glasses. They told me what they'd learned from the dispatchers. At kilometer 402, there really had been a washout. A massive sinkhole sinking into the bog. If the train had hit it at full speed, the carriages would have accordion folded and disappeared into the water. No one would have survived. But the worst came later, when I started digging through archives. There is no station Sorrow on any map. But in local records, in documents from the 1930s, I found mention of a temporary spur used to transport prisoners. A narrow-gauge line ran deep into the swamps. In 1937, a train derailed on that section. It was carrying political prisoners. The guards didn't try to save anyone from the sinking cars. They simply cordoned off the area and waited for the swamp to claim them all. According to legend, one of the prisoners, a former priest or some kind of mystic, cursed the place, vowing to guard that path forever, collecting a debt from the living or saving them, at his own discretion. I quit a week later. I couldn't listen to the sound of wheels anymore. I left the watch with the police as lost property. But I know no one will ever come for it. Now I work in an office, under fluorescent lights, and I never travel by train for business. But sometimes, waking up at 3 in the morning, I smell damp earth and hear a quiet, grinding whisper. I can't go any farther. And I pray that passenger truly got off for good. Because if I ever hear that clatter of wheels in my sleep again, I'm afraid that this time the door won't open outward, but inward. If you liked the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. And remember, if your train stops in the middle of a night forest where there is no station, don't look out the window. And for God's sake, don't open the door. Good night.